Imagine you're standing knee-deep in dirty water, and the water keeps on rising. You rush to grab anything you can get your hands on until your parents force you into a boat. They tell you to keep rowing, to never look back, and to stay safe. At first, it starts off as an adventure until you realize that you have no destination, no home to return to, your land washed away by forces outside of your control. You reach the border with your documents soaked, utterly defenseless. In fact, you're most helpless you have ever been in your life. They register you in a refugee camp with no rights to employment, no access to clean water, nor secure housing, and the conflict is breeding, for scarcity is great. 3 years later, you're still stuck there, powerless in a system that was built against you. And why? All because your home happened to be in a low-income country that is directly affected by climate change, and you happen to be one among the bottom 50% of the world's poorest. Living your life remains but a distant dream. Now all that you know is survival. This is not just one person's story. It is one among 80 million people who are forced to migrate due to sea level rise in Bangladesh alone. And believe it or not, we are going to be next. Yes, you. It is estimated that 1.2 billion people are going to become climate refugees by 2050, because the brutal truth is that climate change does not distinguish between income level or geopolitics, and we can only avoid it for so long. But here comes the paradox. The middle and the upper class, we have been unbelievably good at dodging the bullet. For you to understand what I mean, imagine that this 1 grain of rice represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide. The average person in Nigeria is responsible for adding less than 1 grain into the atmosphere each year. The average person in India, 2 grains. In China, 7 grains. In Germany, 10. And in the US, all of the 17 grains. In 1 year, an average American pollutes 20 times more than the average Nigerian. But the problem is not just about how much of carbon dioxide we are currently emitting, it is also about how much of it has piled up over the years. This amounts to 1,500 gigatons since 1850s. I wanted to show you in practice, but after doing some math, I realized it would take me like 3 million rice bags, so hopefully you get the idea. Looking at this data, it is obvious that it's the wealthiest, most developed countries that contribute to the global climate emergency. It is the top 3 emitters, China, United States, and India, that contribute 42.6% of total emissions. Meanwhile, the bottom 100 countries contribute only 2.9%. This makes the most industrialized countries in the world always partly responsible for every fleeing family in search for clean water and the child losing his home. And we, Western citizens, myself included, have to admit the privilege of not facing the direct consequences of climate change, because we simply have the money to adapt to it. If there is unbearable heat this summer in Madrid, we can simply turn up the AC. But people in Somalia have nowhere to go, nor the means to adapt to extreme weather. This is because climate change disproportionately affects the world's poorest countries and the poor. This graph shows the radical inequality that takes place due to climate change. The red bar represents the relative income losses. And as you see, it is indeed the bottom 50% of the world's population, people who live under $5.5 a day, who will bear a staggering 75% of all income losses expected to happen due to climate change. Instead of affecting the most responsible for gas emissions, it is the innocent who are forced to pay up, but most importantly, the ones who can least afford it. So, as seen before, the ones who are impacted most are the ones who pollute the least, while it is those who are least of all affected by climate change that produce 48% of all gas emissions. It is also the top 10% who own most capital. So they actually possess the financial tools to drive a green transition. However, they are in fact the least impacted by climate change, precisely because of their capital ownership, which allows them the use of money to shield themselves from extreme weather conditions. This, of course, encourages inaction because they can simply pay up to protect their families. The discrepancies in capital ownership also highlight how limited access to capital there is in certain regions, like Africa, regions that are most affected by climate change due to their geographic placement. This results in market inefficiencies, because those who actually can adapt and invest often do not make the right investments or choices because they're driven by their self-interests to give out the money with one hand, but also put more money with the other hand back into their pocket. As we approach 2050, these trends will continue to diverge. These undeniable facts are a wake-up call for all to face the inequalities head-on and bridge the gaps between the wealthy and the poor. Because in order to fight climate change, we must battle poverty first. There are several ways we can counter these issues, but the first one, most crucial one, is to make poor nations wealthier. A rise in GDP, however, would mean a rise in carbon emissions, and from a global perspective, this would be totally self-defeating. That is why it is in the interest of all wealthy nations to help poor nations adapt to climate change. And this begins by providing education, the protection of basic human rights, and access to healthcare. It is time that people become the center of this cause, because behind every statistic there are millions of people on the brink of starvation. Every number represents a life in crisis. There are thousands of children suffering from malnutrition in hospitals when we have the solutions to fix this. So how many more people must needlessly die until the world says enough? The UN and experts worldwide have repeatedly warned us against new investments in fossil fuels. And the business models of oil and gas companies are simply incompatible with human survival. So how many more experts must say this before the world says enough? It is time that we realize that the world is intertwined and so deeply connected that the suffering of one affects us all. Because in the end, climate change is not about numbers or clean air, it's about people. And without battling poverty first, there is no way we're battling climate change anytime soon. Imagine, you're a climate refugee forced to leave your home due to rising sea levels. But no worries, you're not alone. There are 18 million more people like you in Bangladesh who face a similar fate. You reach the border, your documents soaked, your life in turmoil. You enter a refugee camp with no employment rights, no access to clean water, nor secure housing. Scarcity breeds conflict. So what will you do?